Undeclared wars are commonplace. Tragically, our government engages in preemptive war, otherwise known as aggression, with no complaints from the American people. Sadly, we have become accustomed to living with the illegitimate use of force by government. To develop a truly free society, the issue of initiating force must be understood and rejected.
What if sometimes, to love your country, you had to alter or abolish the government? What if Jefferson was right? What if that government is best which governs least? What if it is dangerous to be right when the government is wrong? What if it is better to perish fighting for freedom than to live as a slave? What if freedom's greatest hour of danger is now?
Hi, everyone. Judge Andrew Napolitano here for Judging Freedom. Today is Tuesday, March 10th, 2026. Matt Ho joins us now. Matt, thank you very much for joining us, no matter what we're talking about, even though what we are discussing is heartbreaking. I do want to talk to you because of your experience in Iraq and the persistence of these lies about Iraq, how lies push nations toward war. You fought in Iraq, a war you now regret. Nevertheless, you have firsthand knowledge of the killings there and the lies that got us there, and the lies persist to this day. Please address the core Trump and Lindsey Graham lies that Americans were killed by Iraqis on orders from Iran.
Thanks for having me on, Judge. And it's just astounding and sickening that they're still lying about Iraq. And you have seen this from the president multiple times. You have seen this in written form from the White House. You've certainly seen this from other cabinet officials, and of course from the Trump administration's proxies in Congress and the media, online, pundits, etc. This idea that the Americans who were killed and wounded by Iraqi resistance, by Iraqi insurgents, were killed and wounded on either the orders of the Iranians, or the Iranians provided the roadside bombs, the improvised explosive devices, the IEDs that were used to kill and wound Americans in Iraq. Now, let's just say that the first thing, if there's blood on anyone's hand, or I should say not if, there is blood on people's hands, and those hands belong to the Americans who lied about that war, who started that war, who sustained that war. That's where the responsibility and accountability goes. But in this case, what you have is a lie that was started by the Bush administration in order to justify a war on Iran by the Bush administration, 20 some odd years ago. And this idea was that we are going to blame Iran for the violence in Iraq, for the killing and wounding of our soldiers in Iraq on Iran. And that's going to be one of our justifications to launch this war on Iran. And the Bush administration, and George W. Bush administration, to be clear, the Bush administration went to great lengths to set up this lie and to orchestrate this lie and then to present it publicly. And it was a humiliation. The number of media outlets, former military, people on the ground there said this is simply not true. The IEDs that are killing and wounding Americans are being made by the Iraqis. They're being implanted by the Iraqis, and the Iranians are not telling them to do it. The Iraqis are doing it themselves, primarily because they're occupied. And so it's a lie that's being resurfaced 20 some odd years later, when it wasn't even a successful lie at the time. So this is really maddening. It's sickening. It's disgusting. And it shows, Judge, too, there's a lot of discussion about the parallels between this current war in Iran and the war in Iraq in 2003. But here's one of the differences. In 2003, the men and women in charge were competent liars. And here we have incompetent liars. And so I think that's one of the great differences between these two wars.
Well, But even if these lies were true, they are not a justification for what we're doing now. It's a different generation of human beings and different people involved. We're going to kill 160 schoolgirls whose parents weren't even born at the time.
Right, right. All to justify this war on Iran. This story that was made up that, as I was saying before, excuses or just ignores the reality of what that war in Iraq was. I mean, so I think that's what may be more maddening to me than anything else is the fact that you have so many in the United States, including the media, who just accept it. They hear the president say this, they hear members of Congress say it, they hear Pete Hegseth say it, whoever, and they just allow it. They accept it as if it's true, and it's simply not true. So what you have then is you have, if you could just go to this context, and I think this says a lot for those Americans who are in uniform right now who are carrying out this war and what's in store for them. But if you go and you look at what happened to these American men and women who went to Iraq believing in their government, the way they were put into a war of choice that was built upon lies, that was not just unwinnable, but also immoral, illegal, and counterproductive. And now 20 some odd years later, they're being lied about. So the men I know who were killed by IEDs, who were wounded by IEDs, kids in my command who will never walk again on their own legs. Now I've got the American government lying about the circumstances of their deaths and their wounds, right? I mean, so already it was dishonorable enough. Already it was criminal enough. But now they're taking this lie, again, a lie that didn't work 20 some odd years ago, and they're recycling it. So this is the depravity in all this. But as I was saying before, for those men and women who are in uniform now, if this is what they did to a generation of American service members in Iraq and then by extension Afghanistan, and they lied about it, and now they're lying about it again, what do you think your fate is going to be in all of this?
Here's the latest lie, Chris, number 10 and then number 19.
Mr. President, did the United States bomb a girls' elementary school in southern Iran on the first day of the war and kill 175 people?
In my opinion, based on what I've seen, that was done by Iran.
Is that true, Mr. Hegseth? It was Iran who did that?
We're certainly investigating.
Still investigating.
But the only side that targets civilians is Iran.
We think it was done. We think it was done by Iran.
Can you give us an
because
idea?
they're very inaccurate, as you know, with their munitions. They have no accuracy whatsoever. It was done by Iran.
You just suggested that Iran somehow got its hands on a Tomahawk and bombed its own elementary school on the first day of the war. But you're the only person in your government saying this. Even your defense secretary wouldn't say that when he was asked, standing over your shoulder on your plane on Saturday. Why are you the only person saying this?
Because I just don't know enough about it. I think it's something that I was told is under investigation. But Tomahawks are used by others, as you know. Numerous other nations have Tomahawks. They buy them from us. But I will certainly, whatever the report shows, I'm willing to live with that report.
Probably the only truthful thing he said is that he doesn't know enough about it. Right. But for him to conclude that the Iranians murdered their own school children when we know that this was done, 2 missiles called a double tap. You know this better than I am. I'm recounting what Scott Ritter said yesterday. The second, an incendiary one, conformed so that the remaining fuel in the missile will ignite and incinerate everything. The girls were burnt to a crisp.
Right. The first, I'm reminded, Judge, of a Stonewall Jackson, the American Confederate general, what he said about war and lies. And he said something, like paraphrase. He said, have you ever considered what a source of lies a battlefield can be? And I'm paraphrasing, I don't have it exactly correct, but this idea that this is what comes from war. This is what battlefields produce. They produce lies. And we just see one after another being presented, this confusion. And so these people in charge don't even have the integrity to have their messaging straight, to even understand why they're doing it and be able to articulate it. I mean, this is why this notion of calling this Operation Epstein Fury there's a lot of credibility to that, because if they can't present why they're doing this, if they lie about it constantly and they can't even come up with a unified lie, then what is the real reason that they're hiding here? But these double tap strikes are something that the United States has done throughout this century. This extends back through the Iraq and Afghan wars. The idea of hitting follow-on forces, but more particularly or especially hitting first responders. Idea that you bomb something and then people are going to rush there to help, and hitting them. And so it's a terror tactic. And this is what the United States did in Iraq. It did in Afghanistan. It did in Pakistan, has done it in Yemen, has done it in other areas of the global war on terror. It's a clear war crime. And it's something that the United States has done openly through successive American administrations, and is just really symbolic of the brutality, the barbarism that's at the core of American, not just American warfare, but of generally American policies in the American empire.
What is the off-ramp that Trump has? Does he have one?
Certainly he does, Judge. He could essentially stop the bombing. And I think the Iranians may continue for a day or two, but I think they would stop when the Israelis stop. And then you just basically be in this situation where a lot of people have been killed for what reason? And it would be a defeat for the Americans and the Israelis, and it'd be a victory for the Iranians, if you want to measure it that way. I mean, one of the things we have here that I guess is a good thing, is that Trump is so temperamental. He's so mercurial. He is so unmoored to any principle or any belief. And he doesn't really know what's going on. That's, evidenced in the clips you just showed. That we could be, as we're talking right now, he could be typing out a Truth Social message or whatever, where he's saying the war is over. So we deal with this unpredictability of Donald Trump, which mostly is a bad thing, but maybe it's a good thing in this sense, because he might end the war in a way that previous administrations would not end the war. George W. Bush, to keep focus on him, maybe as we compare our histories here, he was never going to give up on Iraq. I mean, even in 2006, when the Republicans were resoundingly defeated in the midterm elections, he fires Rumsfeld from the Secretary of Defense position, but then he puts in place Bob Gates. And then he sends tens of thousands more troops to Iraq. So, I mean, at least with Trump, we have someone who will change his mind, whereas with a Bush or an Obama or a Biden, they won't change their minds. But, certainly the off-ramp to this is simply stop the war. It's no more difficult than that. The Iranians are not going to negotiate. They're not going to stop fighting until their cities have stopped being bombed. And unfortunately, it seems that the temperature in the Washington, D.C., which is in a bubble from the rest of the country, seems to be that we can keep this thing going. That we're able to temper the markets. We saw that happen yesterday, where the president makes a statement to CBS News and the oil prices start dropping by $10 or $15 a barrel. So I think there's going to be a confidence here in Washington, D.C., that not only can they control things militarily, not only they can control things politically, but they can control things economically. And I think they're wrong on all three counts.
Watch this dispute between Vice President Vance and President Trump, and then a little surprise for you at the end from your favorite senator from South Carolina, number 23.
Sleepwalking us into war with Iran, it's like the dumbest of all possible worlds.
Operation Epic Fury. We have hit hundreds of targets in Iran.
It would be huge distraction of resources. It would be massively expensive to our country.
One of the largest, most complex, most overwhelming military offensives.
I think we should be very strongly encouraging the Iranians, and we just have to be smarter.
We knocked out 9 ships plus their naval building.
America doesn't have to constantly police every every region of the world.
Combat operations continue
One, we would save a lot of money.
until all of our objectives are achieved.
Our interest, I think, very much is in not going to war with Iran.
Now, he's been relatively silent. That's Vice President Vance, with the exception of some tepid support for the war. Also arguing against the war was Director of National Intelligence Gabbard. She's been totally silent, almost missing in action since the war started.
Judge, in 2018, I stood in front of the Capitol building with Tulsi Gabbard, then Representative Gabbard, and the late, great Walter Jones from North Carolina, who I know you knew well.
Yes.
And, God bless him. And they put forward a resolution for the House of Representatives that would require automatic impeachment proceedings for any president who went to war without the authorization of Congress. And that was only 6 years or so ago, 7 years ago or so, or however long, and now this woman is the Director of National Intelligence. I think one of the things that we have to take on here, Judge, is just how unprincipled so many of the people in power are. And
here's the Tulsi Gabbard next to whom you stood. Watch this. This will sadden you because it's a different Tulsi Gabbard that's in office now. Cut number one.
When you violently intervene in the affairs of another country, you're doing something like releasing a wheel at the top of a hill. You can let it go, but you have no control over how it bounces or where it ends. Iran is a perfect example of this.
What is the cost of war? Now, if you listen to politicians talking on camera, or if you hear some of the conversations that happen in Washington, D.C. amongst the permanent Washington class of elite politicians and those in the media and the military-industrial complex, very rarely do you ever hear them actually talk about, ask the question and try to answer, what is the cost of war? Somehow there is always a blank check coming from Congress, spending our American taxpayer dollars to go and wage new wars, a new Cold War, a nuclear arms race, while they tell people back here at home, people who are struggling for clean water or for safe communities or securing our borders, just saying, sorry, there's not enough money. You never hear them actually talk about and tell the American people what is the cost of war, in the form of cost in human lives, the form of cost to American taxpayers, the form of cost to our economy and to our freedom.
It's the Tulsi Gabbard that stood next to you. Where is she now?
I think she's trying to triangulate or she's put herself in a position, Judge, where she's got nowhere to go. She's alienated herself from the Democratic Party, that she can never go back there, where she was a rising star. And she left the Democratic Party, I think, for very good reasons. But with the Republican Party, if she mouths off against Trump, where does she go? She's a young woman. She has ambitions. What does she do next? So the smartest thing for her personally is to keep her mouth shut. J.D. Vance, the same. J.D. Vance was against these wars. And supposedly last year, he was one of the few voices of restraint around Donald Trump with regards to Iran. That seemed to have changed back in December or January. And I'm thinking it's probably because J.D. Vance wants Donald Trump's endorsement in 2028. He's not going to get it if he mouths off against Donald Trump. And here we have this problem, Judge, where I was talking before about the willingness of Trump to change his mind. And a lot of that's just based upon the fact that he has no principles or beliefs or anchors. But he's surrounded by people like that as well. And so which is more dangerous for us? Which is more dangerous for the world? A cabinet that's full of ideologues that are certain, like Bush's cabinet was, or Biden's cabinet was, or a cabinet that's full of conmen and opportunists and sycophants who'll say whatever's best for them in the moment.
Here's Senator Blumenthal. Quite properly, I rarely agree with him on anything, fearful about boots on the ground. He just walked out of one of those secret briefings. Chris, number 24.
I guess I am most concerned about the threat to American lives of potentially deploying our sons and daughters on the ground in Iran. We seem to be on a path toward deploying American troops on the ground in Iran to accomplish any of the potential objectives here. The American people deserve to know much more than this administration has told them about the cost of the war, the danger to our sons and daughters in uniform, and the potential for further escalation and widening of this war, a war of choice made by this president, not chosen by the American people, with potentially huge consequences to American lives.
Do you think boots on the ground are coming?
I think that's where the mindset is in Washington, D.C. right now, Judge. I mean, they're briefing this to members of Congress that they know are going to, as soon as they leave the conference room, like you said, are going to go right to the cameras and say it. I think they are fear-mongering as much as they can. Part of also what Blumenthal had to say, and remind people that he is Lindsey Graham's travel companion, that they go to Kyiv all the time together, right? He is the Democratic version of Graham. He fear-mongered as well in those statements about China and Russia. So essentially making a case for war, if you will, because the Russians and Chinese are involved, and they're helping the Iranians kill Americans, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So these men and women who are voicing these concerns, I think they're all hedging, and they're sticking within the structures of the established narrative that the American empire presents of, essentially the world is coming for us. We have to fight them over there so we don't fight them here, while trying to cover their behinds from any type of political backlash. Now, the idea of a ground campaign, as ludicrous as it sounds, seems to have feet underneath it. You have many in Washington, D.C., Judge, that when you talk to them about Iraq or Syria or Libya, they will describe them as near successes. You have men at the Pentagon, at CIA, in the think tanks, in commentary spaces, who believe that if things had just been done differently, if X and Y had also happened with A and B, then Iraq would have been a success, right? Then Syria wouldn't have turned out the way it did. Then Libya would have been manageable. And, people say, what about the lessons learned? And in Washington, D.C., the lessons learned are always about how to make the previous failures better or more efficient or allow them to happen again. It's never about not doing it. It's about, okay, we've got the generals now. This is what we heard with the escalation of the Afghan war. We've got the generals who learned what this type of warfare is about in Iraq, and now they're going to Afghanistan, and they're going to use the lessons learned of Iraq to win in Afghanistan. I mean, that's what you're going to hear if American troops actually go into Iran, that we're not going to repeat the mistakes. We've learned the lessons, and it's all just this lunacy. It's this hubris. It's this, it is the manifestation of the war state that is our government. But the idea of putting boots on the ground, Judge, I think, to expand upon just for a moment here, the idea that they have is it's going to be special forces and special operations forces and the CIA people going in with the Kurds, as well as maybe the Azeris or the Baluchs or whoever, and they're going to advise them and they're going to help them take on Iranian forces. And then the Iranians are going to commit atrocities, and those atrocities will spur more people to join these uprisings. But the reality is, say it actually does play out like that, what's going to happen, and the Americans are going to start taking casualties. So then they're going to say, we need more troops here to protect us. And then those troops are going to be present. And then the American commanders are going to say, but we have to do more because we don't want to be seen as occupiers. So we have to start building bridges, and we start to have to start building schools. So more American troops will show up to do that. And then they'll be afraid of saying we don't have the right force protection, and so they don't want to be like the Secretary of Defense during the Somalia expedition, who got blamed for the American deaths by not having tanks there. Okay, so now we got to have an armor brigade cross the Al-Faw Peninsula from Kuwait into Iran. You can see very easily how this mission creep occurs. And when you start off up with saying, okay, there's going to be 1,000 Americans there as advisors, just like in Vietnam or in Afghanistan, you very quickly end up with 20,000 troops. And if you have 20,000 troops, then next thing you know, you're being told you need 40,000 troops to protect those 20,000 troops, plus do other things in the country, plus also ensure the ability to win. And then you have an occupation that resembles the many, many occupations that everyone watching is familiar with.
Here's the president's press secretary, it's either yesterday or Sunday, mentioning the D word, draft.
All of your sons and daughters will end up getting a draft notice, the thing called a draft. Dad, what's this? Oh, congratulations, you've been drafted into the military. You're going to fight a war against a country that nobody's ever heard of.
But if you're worried about the world spinning out of control, if you're worried about a military draft, if you're worried about, God forbid, a world war, the best way to prevent it is to vote for Donald Trump.
Mothers out there are worried that we're going to have a draft, that they're going to see their sons get in and daughters get involved in this.
President Trump wisely does not remove options off of the table. I know a lot of politicians like to do that quickly, but the president, as commander-in-chief, wants to continue to assess the success of this military operation. It's not part of the current plan right now, but the president, again, wisely keeps his options on the table.
And one of those options is a form of slavery known as the draft.
Essentially, I'm certainly against it on libertarian principles. I think a lot of people are. And Judge, if you want to get Larry Wilkerson excited, make sure you talk with him about this. This is what really, will get Larry emotional. But this idea that we're going to pursue a war against Iran for anything more than a period of weeks or months without having to use doing a call up of at least reserves and guardsmen is unthinkable. I mean, we saw the first 6 people killed in this war have all been reservists. The 3 soldiers killed in Jordan back in 2024 were reservists. 40% of the Americans who were part of the Iraq and Afghan wars, who were part of that occupation, were reserve or guard. The American military can't fight without mobilizing its reserve and guard. Now, the issue is that in the last 20 some odd years, we have hollowed out our force. That because of recruiting challenges, reenlistment and retention issues, as well as just the fact that the defense budget is not meant to provide for a U.S. military that provides national security to the American people. It's meant to provide profits to corporations, means that you have essentially an American fighting force that is hollow. That is, many people describe as a paper tiger. I might not go that far, but I'm not that far away from joining those ranks, though. And so the idea then that this starts to go 6 months, a year, you do have ground forces in Iran. The idea of being able to fill out those units to provide men and women in uniform to carry out such an occupation, as well as all the other commitments around the world. That's the thing. You have the United States is overextended with commitments militarily. They have this fantasy, Judge, of building out a 350, 400 ship fleet. They don't have the sailors to man it. They don't have the sailors to man the less than 300 ships we have right now. So you have this real concern. I think they would end the war before they went to the draft because it'd be so unpopular. But you do have this reality that the United States, even though we spend $1 trillion a year, we have a hollowed and vapid military that couldn't carry out a war, even if it was a worthwhile one.
Matthew Ho, thank you very much, my dear friend. Thanks for your insight generated by your personal experiences as well as your knowledge of all these things. Much appreciated.
Thanks, Judge.
Thank you. Coming up at 3 o'clock, if you're watching us live in 30 minutes, Colonel Karen Kwiatkowski, Judge Napolitano for Judging Freedom.